One of my absolute favourite things about Bleach is the way Kubo provides various avenues for the reader to examine his characters. Oftentimes, the person they present themselves to be is not actually who they are, not just because they're a fraud, which can be the case, but also because many of these characters don't yet understand themselves. Almost every member of this cast is grappling with their identity, as Bleach is a story almost entirely focused on exploring the self. Identity is arguably the most important theme of the entire story, and we as readers have been given several tools and methods to explore the identities of these characters. Whether it be the volume poems, group dynamics and how characters are gathered in categories that inform them, the boatload of symbolism that can be found in every single chapter of the manga, or my personal favourite, the several different power systems of Bleach and how they function as a window into the hearts of these characters. These are all different avenues present within Bleach we can use to examine the characters, and within the power system there are multiple impressive character writing techniques on display that can sometimes tell us more about these people than even their own dialogue. Today I want to dive deep into the Zanpakuto system, the mechanics, the thematics, the dynamics, to illustrate why I believe the Zanpakuto is one of Kubo's greatest concepts in all of Bleach. I know I've spoken about Zanpakuto various times in the past, but you can think of this as your one-stop shop for everything about them, with a lot of stuff I've never covered on this channel before. With that said, let's dive right into this. The Zanpakuto is just one of the many different power systems present in the series. In fact, it's just one of the 4 fundamental combat styles of a Shinigami alongside Kido, Hoho, and Hakuda. Of the 4, the Zanpakuto is by far the most utilized system for good reason. Every character from every spiritual race has a unique weapon that functions as a medium to manifest their souls. Shinigami Zanpakuto, Aranka Zanpakuto, Quincy Shrifts, and the object of attachment for Fullbringers. This is why Bleach has such a ridiculously diverse spectrum of powers. You have things as simple as big sword go whoosh to complement the straightforward nature of Zaraki Kenpachi, to things as elaborate as turning children's games into reality. Bleach abilities are capable of pretty much anything and everything, since they're essentially the manipulation of Reishi, which everything in the cosmos is composed of. Power in Bleach can be viewed as control over the fabric of reality, which is achieved through control over the self in the case of Shinigami. Many people forget this because it isn't given extreme focus, but there are 2 established categories for the different types of Zanpakuto: power types and Kido types. All elemental Zanpakuto like Ryujin Jakka or Hyorin Maru fall under the umbrella of Kido types. Essentially, all Zanpakuto that have specific magical abilities are Kido types. Power types are far simpler. They're designed for melee combat and supplement the user's general power. A general rule of thumb is that power type Zanpakuto users are far more simple to understand in ideology and heart, which is reflected in their relatively basic powers. Ichigo, Kenpachi, Renji, Omeida, and Ikaku are all wielders of power types in the series, which gets my point across nicely. These are all some of the most unambiguous, straightforward characters in the series, specifically when it comes to their philosophies and dispositions, and that is of course reflected in the simple nature of their powers. Although the overall framework of Zanpakuto powers is incredibly diverse with very few limitations, ultimately resembling a blank canvas that can be turned into anything, each individual Zanpakuto must follow a specific theme. There's always one underlying theme present in all of the abilities a unique Zanpakuto holds, connecting their Shikai and Bankai in some way, whether this be a literal or symbolic connection. For example, Gin's Shikai is to extend and retract his blade at a very high speed. His Bankai amplifies these abilities, giving him even more reach and even faster speeds. But that's not all his Bankai can do, otherwise it would be categorized as a power type Zanpakuto. The true ability of Kamishinu no Yari is to turn into dust for just a few seconds when it expands and contracts. There is a deadly poison within the blade that dissolves and breaks down cells. Gin can leave a sliver of his Zanpakuto in his victim and turn this into an internal explosion of sorts that causes the victim's body to break down at a cellular level from the inside out. You might be wondering, where's the connection between fast, long sword and deadly poison? It's simple, really. The underlying theme present in Gin Zanpakuto is that of a snake, and the Bankai's true ability is snake's venom. Let's quickly establish some of the ground rules, the key mechanics that all Zanpakuto fall under. Every Zanpakuto was once a nameless Asauchi forged by Uetsu Nimaya of Squad 0. The only possible exceptions are familial Zanpakuto like Shinken Hakkyoken or the Tsunayashiros and Rakyoten, but they're not significant for the purposes of this video since they operate differently to 99% of Zanpakuto in the series. By spending a lot of time with this nameless Asauchi, a Shinigami imprints their soul onto the weapon, containing a sentient being within the blade, which is their Zanpakuto, Zanpakuto, which is an extension of the user's soul. The name of a Zanpakuto is the name of the living spirit existing within the blade, which functions like an extra limb. The Zanpakuto are inextricably connected to their users, living and dying alongside their master. They're not just a reflection of the Shinigami soul, but a part of it, a piece of them. There has never been a Shinigami who has awakened their Zanpakuto without using an Asauchi forged by Nimaya, as per his own words. However, Zanpakuto spirits aren't born from the connection to this Asauchi. They're not created by the bonding process. Rather, it would be more accurate to say they are placed into the blade as a part of the unique Zanpakuto creation process. There's a simple question that makes this very easy to understand. What is the difference between the regular souls residing in Soul Society awaiting reincarnation and the Shinigami? There's some slight differences in their anatomy, with the Saketsu, Hakusui and Reiatsu vents the wrists of all Shinigami, but there's something much simpler that marks this distinction: the Zanpakuto spirit. In Toshiro's extra chapter, we see Hyorin Maru long before Toshiro joined the Shinigami Academy and received an Asauchi. He can hear a voice inside him. He dreams of an icy field. The voice is Hyorin Maru's and the icy field is his inner world. When Rangiku meets Toshiro, she tells him that communicating with the voice he hears and controlling the power it provides him with is exactly what it means to become a Shinigami. When Nimaya kicks Ichigo out of the Ryokyu and sends him home packing, he says the Soul Society is for Shinigami, and without a Zanpakuto, you're just a normal human. It's very clear that what separates Shinigami from the rest of spiritual existence is the Zanpakuto spirit each Shinigami possesses. As such, the Asauchi can be viewed as a medium between the inner and outside worlds. It grants the Zanpakuto spirit the power to manifest into the real world, and it allows Shinigami to use their power that comes from within. Names carry power in the world of Bleach. That without a name has no power. Knowing and calling out the name of a technique is necessary to draw out its maximum power, which is shown with Getsuga Tensho. Ichibei painting over Yuhaba's name with Black Ant reduced his power to that of an ant crawling on the ground. Yachiru gains the power of a Shinigami upon receiving a name from Kenpachi. Names are incredibly important and intrinsically connected to all things power related, but especially Zanpakuto. Renji knowing only half of his Bankai's name massively hindered him for most of the series. Yumichika intentionally calling his Shikai by the wrong name also massively hinders him. Ichigo, as the king of his own soul, can manifest Quincy powers as a Shinigami Zanpakuto by calling the spirit of Yuhaba within him by the name Zangetsu. Names are very important in this story, not just in universe, but from a reader's perspective as well. When it comes to naming schemes and the meanings behind them, Kubo has some of the most attention to detail I've probably ever seen from any creator, period. Every single name carries meaning of some importance, and this goes for the Zanpakuto itself, the attacks, the release commands, and even the names of the characters. This isn't rare for manga, since Japanese is a language where wordplay and double or even triple meanings are incredibly common, but Kubo really takes this to the next level. It's one of the most informative elements of the story. There are so many names I could cover, but let's just go over two of the coolest examples. Gin's Shikai roughly translates to God's Spear, while his Bankai translates to God Killing Spear, exposing his true motives upon activation in chapter 399, just under 20 chapters before his betrayal of Aizen. This is also the first Deicide chapter, which makes the activation of Gin's Bankai the trigger for the final act of the Arrancar saga. Unohana's Shikai and Bankai are read in the same way, but carry very different meanings in the provided kanji. The Shikai Minazuki translates to gorging flesh drops, while the Bankai Minazuki translates to all things end. The coolest thing about this is how it complements Unohana's dual persona, the sweet caring healer of Squad 4 and the battle crazed maniac of Squad 11. A broken Shikai can repair with time, but a broken Bankai can never return to what it once was. It must be reforged into something new. This is an allegory for bonds and connections, which take up a completely new form after significant issues. They'll never be the same as they once were. They must be remade into something new. Now, I've seen a lot of complaints about this mechanic because of how late in the game we learn about it, and some misconceptions flowing around about how Zanpakuto work. Renji's Bankai was completely destroyed by Byakuya in their battle, so Mayuri saying it was just a few of the blade joints is complete cap, right? No, that's not right. When a character is heavily injured and defeated in the state of Bankai, their weapon will shatter and revert to its sealed state. We see this happen to Ichigo when Ulquiorra destroys him in chapter 272. His Shihakusho, which is part of his Bankai, dissipates, Tensa Zangetsu shatters, and it reverts to his normal blade. The same thing happens to Torsen against Kenpachi, where he's been heavily injured and his Bankai is destroyed. This is not the same as Yugaram literally cutting Tensa Zangetsu in half. There's a discrepancy between the Bankai itself being targeted and broken by an attack, and the user being injured, which makes the Bankai shatter and return to the user's inner world. That's enough of the simple mechanics though, let's dive into the juicier stuff. Zanpakuto have 3 forms. The basic sealed state, which is usually just a regular schmegular katana that has little unique details in the designs depending on the user. In rare cases, the sealed state isn't even a katana at all, like Kisuke's cane blade, Yamamoto's staff, or all of Squad Zero excluding Nimaya, because Kubo must think it's funny to not show us the #1 Zanpakuto creators, Zanpakuto. Zanpakuto in their sealed state have no special abilities until they have been unsealed. The second form of the Zanpakuto is the Shikai, or first release, which gives the user access to their unique abilities. Shikai is a partial synchronization between the user and the Zanpakuto spirit, a middle ground between the two. It's like filtering out a partial amount of the Zanpakuto spirit into the real world, which is reflected in most Shikai designs, which take elements of their Zanpakuto spirit both visually and in the form of their abilities. And the third and final form of the Zanpakuto is of course the Bankai, or final release. This is the complete externalization of the Zanpakuto spirit into the real world, taking the Zanpakuto to its natural conclusion with a full synchronization between the user and the spirit. There's a lot of wordplay in Japanese with the terms Shikai and Bankai, where the Kai part of the words can both mean release and understanding, taking from the terms Kaiho and Rikai respectively, and through this reading, Shikai can be understood as the beginning of understanding, and Bankai can be understood as complete understanding, which lines up incredibly well with Bleach's themes of the self. I unfortunately don't speak Japanese, so I can't completely fact check this, but I got this information from a Tumblr post by this user whose name is on the screen right now. I've also left a link to the post in the description below. Their page is an absolute goldmine with hundreds of posts on Kubo's use of language and wordplay. I highly recommend all fans of the series to check them out. I also think this is a good time to address one of the biggest complaints I've seen for Bleach, which is the lack of Zanpakuto spirits. The only ones we see in the manga are the 2 Zangetsu, Zabimaru, Katen and Kyokotsu, Hyorinmaru, and this little sketch of Kazeshini. There might be another one I'm forgetting, but yeah. This also used to be a complaint I shared until I realized that Bankai is literally the externalization of a Zanpakuto spirit into the real world, which means Tengen Myo, Benihime, Mayuri's big ass baby, Minazuki, so on and so forth, are essentially just Zanpakuto spirits. They're not entirely the same as the spirit residing in the Shinigami's inner world, but they're at the very least a fantastic window into how the spirits might look. You may know that Kubo personally designed all the spirits for the Zanpakuto Rebellion filler arc, and just look at Rukia's Bankai alongside her spirit. Look at Ichigo's Shihakusho when he's in Bankai, it's literally Zangetsu's cloak. This is obviously a synchronized form between Zanpakuto spirits and the user themselves, but like I said, fantastic window into how the spirits might look. Anyways, Shikai is a partial manifestation of one's soul, whilst Bankai is a full manifestation. This follows a similar principle to Yumichika's partial Shikai. He intentionally calls it Fuji Kujaku instead of its real name, which leads to a middle ground between the first form, the sealed state, and the second form, his true Shikai. Instead of his Zanpakuto taking the form of several vines that ensnare the opponent and consume their Ryatsu, which is the true form of his Shikai, it takes the form of several blades instead, purely a power boost with no special Kido ability. That's exactly the relationship between most people's Shikai and Bankai, a partial release of their true power. It's a good little analogy for how the relationship between Shikai and Bankai functions. This understanding is crucial to appreciate the writing that is filtered through these characters' abilities. When it comes to the relationship between a Shikai and a Bankai, there seems to be 2 main categories that every Zanpakuto falls under. Type 1. Many people have Bankai that are just enhanced versions of their Shikai with a special ability or 2. For example, Byakuya turns his sword into 1,000 cherry blossoms for his Shikai, and he turns each cherry blossom into 1,000 more cherry blossoms for his Bankai. Pretty simple trajectory, it's just an increase in volume. Komamura summons parts of Tengen Myo in his Shikai, and he fully summons Tengen Myo in his Bankai. Renji's Shikai gives him a segmented blade that functions very similarly to his Bankai, a partial manifestation of Zabimaru. The same principle applies to Toshiro. In Shikai, he partially summons Hyorinmaru and can use some of his unique abilities, and in Bankai, he essentially becomes Hyorinmaru, turning into an ice dragon himself. There are other Zanpakuto of this type, like Ichigo's, Rose's, Ikaku's, or Rukia's, where their Bankai is a natural, consistent follow-up to their Shikai. Type 2. The second main category of Zanpakuto is where the Bankai seems to be the exact opposite of the Shikai, a stark contrast while still falling under a central theme. Shunsui's Shikai turns children's games into reality, and his Bankai is based on an adult play, the Theatre Suicide. The contrast speaks for itself, and the central theme can either be something related to entertainment, or the fact Shunsui's ability puts him at the same level of risk as his target. Both the Shikai and Bankai are bound by rules that everybody involved must abide by. Soifon's Shikai is a 2-hit kill assassination weapon, while her bankai is an extremely flashy rocket launcher. Pretty much polar opposites in application, but there's still several shared themes there. Ichibei's shikai removes names, and his bankai gives him the ability to give that thing a name of his choosing. Unohana's shikai is a manta ray that heals people with its stomach acid by swallowing them, while her bankai uses those acidic properties purely for destruction. I also think Unohana's bankai transports everybody in the vicinity into the stomach of Minazuki itself, which would explain the appearance of the Muken once her bankai is activated during the battle with Zaraki. And just like the previous type, there are several other Zanpakuto that seem to have oppositional shikai and bankai, like Urohara, whose shikai destroys things and his bankai constructs things. You know, there's the dichotomy of destruction and construction. There's a trend here. The people who follow the former type, where their bankai is just a natural extension of their shikai, are people who are honest with themselves. The person who they present themselves to be is accurate to who they really are. The shikai shows part of their true self, and their bankai presents their complete true selves. On the other hand, those with bankai that are opposites to their shikai are people who outwardly purport themselves to be somebody they are not. Unohana is a bloodthirsty battle maniac at her core, but she presents herself as the kind, caring healer of the Gotei 13. Urahara is one of the most manipulative, possessive characters in the story, yet he presents himself as the goofy, unbothered, lowly candy shop owner. Ichibei is very similar in that regard. He's one of the most sadistic, cunning characters in the entire story, while simultaneously presenting himself as the upbeat, laughing Buddha of the Soul Society. If shikai presents the outer self and bankai presents the inner self, then the first type, where they are the same, is a sign of honesty and transparency, while the second type, where they're opposites, is a sign of duplicity and dishonesty. Bleach is ultimately a story where very little is perfectly explained to us. Kubo limits the amount of information he provides us with and very rarely gives us definitive statements on the intricate details of the world he's crafted. Much of the information covered in this video is passed out of visual storytelling or symbolism or certain recurring motifs. There are absolutely some established rules, but there's a certain level of fluidity you have to apply when engaging with a story that is wholly defined by expressionism like Bleach. When we're talking about Zanpakuto, we're talking about people's souls taking physical form. The possibilities are boundless, and the sheer amount of details one can extract through thorough examination of these weapons is just incredible. I'm not going to spend time going through each and every Zanpakuto and giving you a breakdown of how it informs the associated character, because we talk about Zanpakuto in almost every Bleach video I've ever made. Instead, I want to focus on some of the lesser appreciated aspects of Zanpakuto that can be found across the series. For example, how relationships between different characters in universe can impact their Zanpakuto. Remember, this is an extension of the soul. It's like a mirror that reflects all parts of the world are back at them, the good, the bad, and the aspects of the self that are influenced by others. When it comes to that last part, how other people can have an influence over one Zanpakuto, there's a few examples I want to cover. Renji's shikai, as well as his false bankai Hihiyo Zabimaru, are both designed for the purpose of reach, which is almost entirely a product of his dynamic with Byakuya. He wants to reach the moon. He yearns to surpass his captain someday, and that is reflected in the appearance and abilities of his Zanpakuto. When he learns the true name of the blade, So-o Zabimaru, he gains the baboon arm that specifically allows him to grab onto things, a subtle reference to the tale of the monkey and the moon. I also think Rukia's Zanpakuto, specifically the abilities she mistakenly presumed it possessed, was largely influenced by her relationship with Kai and Shiba. Before the Thousand-Year Blood War, Rukia was under the assumption that Sode no Shireyuki was a sword that emits freezing air from its tip, almost identical to Kaien's Nejibana, which emits water from its tip. We also have the connection between Kaien's dance-like technique and the fact that Rukia labels each of her techniques dances. Even her release command, Mae, is a reference to a very specific form of Japanese dance. This all makes sense, especially since Rukia practiced her abilities with Kaien. He was there when she invented a lot of them. He was the most important connection in her life for a decent chunk of it, even after his death, and he remains one of the biggest influences on her soul until the very end of the series. We have the case of Gin and his Bankai's secret ability, which I mentioned earlier. Kamishini no Yari can turn into dust for just a few seconds when it expands and contracts. I wonder who else has a Zanpakuto that turns into dust. That's right, the person Gin did absolutely everything for. And lastly, there's Ikaku Shikai, which has the healing medicine as a part of its abilities. This reflects the lesson learnt from his duel with Zaraki, who told him surviving a fight to the death is his lucky day and he should cherish that. Ikaku's Bankai also reminds me of Zaraki with the power increase through battle, which is is slightly similar to how Zaraki returns to what he once was, as he slowly overcomes his self-imposed mental barriers through near-death experiences. I'm sure there are many more examples of relationships between characters heavily impacting the functionality of the Zanpakuto, but these are the only ones I think are worth mentioning today. Before we end the video, there are two small aspects of the Zanpakuto system that I want to call attention to. If you know me, you know my favorite character in this story is the main man Kurosaki Ichigo 100 times out of 10. And what I'm about to briefly cover is another one of those little details that highlight his elevated position in this world fantastically. The dual Zanpakuto and constant release types. In the Soul Society arc, Katen Kyokotsu and Sogyo no Kotowari are stated to be the only Zanpakuto of their kind to exist in all of Soul Society. These are the only dual type Zanpakuto, and their elevated status is made very clear by Yamamoto's admiration of the sight. But by the time the 1,000-Year Blood War comes along and we learn more about this phenomenon, these dual types are not exactly what they seem. They're completely unnatural and massively influenced by outside factors. Kyoraku had Ohana, or Katen, give birth to Okyo, or Kyototsu, in order to hide the Ise family's Zanpakuto. He is harboring an outside entity within his soul. Now, whether he his Zanpakuto spirit or not, I'll leave that up to you to decide, but his second spirit is contingent to the first. Shunsui originally had a single Zanpakuto spirit just like every other Shinigami until that spirit was split into two parts. The two swords come from a common source, from a single Zanpakuto spirit that was split in two. Jushiro is a similar case with the outside entity residing within his soul, and the Count for Your Own World light novels outright state that Mimihagi is the reason why Ukitake had a dual type Zanpakuto. His blade in the Hell one shot seems to be singular too, which would make sense since Mimihagi is of course not a part of him anymore. Once again though, Ukitake had a single Zanpakuto spirit, and as you all clearly know, dual wielding is not a privilege reserved for just those two. It's also a privilege for our main character. Once again, we have a very similar scenario with an outside entity existing within Ichigo's soul in the form of Yuhaba or Old Man Zangetsu. White is the true Zanpakuto spirit, technically speaking. He is the manifestation of Ichigo's Shinigami powers, while the Old Man Zangetsu is the manifestation of Ichigo's Quincy powers, a fragment of Yuhaba within him. But Ichigo, after everything but the rain, is king of his own soul. He is the shot caller. He chooses the reality of his Zanpakuto and recognizes both of these inner spirits as Zangetsu, even though the old man is not technically a Zanpakuto spirit. And on top of this, unlike Kyoraku and Jushiro, Ichigo actually contains two separate, unconnected spirits within him that are embodied by each of his swords. In a lot of ways, you could argue that Ichigo is the only one of the three who has a true dual Zanpakuto formed by the spirits that naturally existed within him, even if their origins may be very special. The constant release Shikai is a concept introduced to us by Yoruichi to explain why Ichigo doesn't have a sealed state for his Zanpakuto. This concept came about when trying to rationalize how Zaraki could be so powerful. The idea that this guy managed to become a captain, let alone the Kenpachi, with no Shikai, let alone a Bankai, was simply unfathomable, and they had to find a justification for this. And so it was believed that Zaraki's weapon was a Zanpakuto that is constantly released, constantly in Shikai mode. This was obviously proven false when the 1,000-Year Blood War came around and Zaraki finally learnt the name of his Zanpakuto and released Nozarashi, and the blade changed shape like a Zanpakuto should. This means that the chipped sword he was using before this point, that was just his Zanpakuto in its sealed state. Byakuya's words in the battle against Gerard confirmed this. Perhaps the constant release type never existed. Does this apply for Ichigo's Zangetsu? We know that the sword he was using in the pre-time skip was not a traditional Zanpakuto. It was a construct of Old Man Zangetsu's, but what about after the blade is mere? He still remains in Shikai mode at all times. Zangetsu still doesn't have a sealed state. Like Byakuya said, there's no such thing as a constant release type. There are no other Zanpakuto in all of Soul Society's history that cannot be sealed. Even Kensei, whose sealed state we rarely ever see, simply remains in Shikai out of choice. So it seems either Zangetsu is special due to its hollow nature, or Ichigo is simply so powerful that, you know, his sword cannot be sealed, like the Soul Society theorized was the case for Kenpachi. Both make a lot of sense and both serve to elevate Ichigo's position within this world even further. That's why he's the main man, that's why he's number one, that's why he's the best character in the series. Not really, that's not why, but you know, let me glaze it. That's my goal. There's so many more interesting elements of the Zanpakuto system I'd like to cover, but we'd be here for hours. Like, you can genuinely talk about Zanpakuto as a power system for days, for weeks, for months. But instead of, you know, talking about it forever, I want to dedicate a video to Arranca Zanpakuto similar to this one, while exploring some of the contrast between them and the Shinigami Zanpakuto, as well as a video on the Quincy Shrifts doing the same thing. You can expect all of those videos on the channel in the coming weeks and months because Bleach has been rotting my brain more than ever lately. There's just so much for us to talk about. So as always, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.